The 9 key risk factors that this commission found were: number 1 was an education level of 11 to 12 years maximum. Now, I don't want anyone to go out of here thinking, oh my gosh, if I only got to this point in high school, does this mean I'm going to have dementia? I mean, it doesn't work that way. But I think the key point to take home with that is that continuing to work the brain, regardless of formal education, is really imperative to keep the brain active, and maybe one of the modifiable factors that can reduce risk. So learning is kind of the key I take out of this. Midlife hypertension. There's been a huge association between uncontrolled midlife blood pressure, high blood pressure, and fast forwarding into dementia earlier. So when somebody talks about making sure, that your blood pressure is under control, because it's such a silent condition, and I have so many people even who come to the clinic when you say, your blood pressure is kind of high today, and they're so surprised. And I say, well, do you check it out in the community when you're more relaxed? And they're like, no. And it's like, well, maybe that's a good idea, just to get an early handle on something that might be controllable, but might not be evident to you in anything that is symptomatic. Midlife obesity. So, getting the weight under better control. We know that even a small percentage of weight loss has a huge value for reducing cardiovascular risk factors. Hearing loss. You're going to see more and more about hearing loss and a relationship. And there's a number of reasons for that. The hearing center is not too far from the hippocampal region and the memory center of the brain. But also, hearing loss promotes a lazy brain, because somebody's working so hard to hear what's happening around them that they're not focusing on things that they could be doing to strengthen the other parts of the brain. And people withdraw socially because they think, I'm not going to go to that because I don't hear what those people are saying anyway. Late life depression, and that's gotten a lot more attention also, where people have gone through their life, everything has been nice and controlled, and now they start to have some different behavioral changes. That's really a factor. And depression is really important, and moods are really important as a modifiable risk factor. Diabetes. Diabetes is known as the third dementia. People with diabetes, especially if it's uncontrolled, are much more likely to move into dementia earlier. Physical inactivity. Physical inactivity is linked with dementia. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Smoking, I shouldn't even have to talk about smoking. And then, of course, social isolation. And we're learning more and more that people who withdraw from society as they get more senior have more risk factors for dementia. So the key point with this is we can't change our age, family history, although sometimes I think we would like to change some of those members in our family, and we can't change our genetic susceptibility. It is what it is. So I think, those things are kind of a given. Age is probably the biggest risk factor for dementia. But heart health is brain health. And I think we have to start learning and thinking about what we do for the heart and what we do to prevent our stroke is just as important in preventing dementia. And we know that we have better treatments for the heart. We have stents, we have surgery, we have things we can do. Things like stroke and things like dementia, we don't. So having a really heart-healthy lifestyle is really important. So let me talk about a few other studies. There's midlife cardiovascular risk factors that have been associated with increased chances of dementia. This is from a National Institute of Health study that was published in 2017. Close to 16,000 people who were followed over 25 years. And participants who had diabetes, pre-hypertension, so the blood pressure was just starting to creep up there on a regular basis, or hypertension had a higher chance of developing dementia in this epidemiological study. And of interest, when they controlled for all the other factors in this, diabetes was as strong as a predictor as having an independent presence of the gene, the risk factor that some people carry for maybe developing dementia. So the two were equal in terms of risk factors. So that says a lot in terms of what you can, something that's modifiable. Related to the study was that an extension of the study was that presence of one or more vascular risk factors, such as blood pressure, obesity, hypertension, cardiac disease, atrial fibrillation, one or more vascular risk factors in midlife was associated with higher levels of beta amyloid in the brain, the bad protein, in Alzheimer's disease. So there's some association even between vascular neurodegenerative processes and Alzheimer's disease processes. Women and high blood pressure. There's a Kaiser Permanente study published in 2017 of 5,600 participants that they followed these women over a number of years. And women with high blood pressure in midlife, age 40s, showed a 65% increased risk of dementia over time compared to those that had normal blood pressures. The same risk, now guys, this does not mean you're off the hook. In this study, the same risk for men was not shown, and it's not known why. So I kind of don't want you to go out of here and think, well, my blood pressure doesn't matter, but those poor women, because it doesn't work that way. Physical exercise. A number of studies have shown that physical exercise can be beneficial. And there was just a small study in Germany published in 2017, which was actually a randomized controlled trial that showed that physical exercises prevented an increase in choline. The choline is a breakdown product that destroys nerve cells, because there's a good choline also. But it also improved cardiac efficiency in the intervention group. So we know that exercise has a big effect on cardiovascular and cerebrovascular health. There was a longitudinal Swedish study published earlier this year that showed women with high, and this is women with pretty intense physical fitness practices in midlife, and they were 90% less likely to develop dementia in later life. And these were 91 women, average age of 50 at the beginning of the study. They were followed for 44 years. And one of the keys from this, even for the optimally physically fit women who did develop dementia, their onset compared to the other group was delayed by 11 years compared to other exercise groups. So even if they were predisposed to having dementia, the dementia occurred at a much more of a delayed time frame. We do know that brain training exercise in speed matters, apparently. There was a study done over 10 years that just came out recently from the Indiana University. And they actually did this online training. Now everybody's going to go home and they're going to go to their computers and they're going to look up Brain HQ. I just know it, but it's actually it was a intervention that they use for speed of processing. It is a commercial thing, but they do have a free trial period of it. But they found that in this study, the risk of dementia was 29% lower in those who received speed of processing training compared with the control group. So there's something about triggering the brain and working it on a regular basis that really helps to offset and delay dementia. The big international study, it's now international, it started in Finland, but is the FINGER study, which is the Finnish Geriatric Intervention Study to prevent cognitive impairment and disability. And now it's happening, and they're doing it in Singapore. It's known as the SINGER study for Singapore, and there's a number of other sites. But this involved 4 intensive lifestyle strategies. These were high-risk people or maybe mild cognitive impairment or early dementia people. And they did 4 lifestyle strategies. They did diet, a very strict controlled Mediterranean style diet, cognitive training. I think in this study, if I'm not mistaken, I think they taught them to learn a new musical instrument as part of the training. Vascular management, so if they had diabetes, they got their A1Cs down, they got their girth down, they had them exercise, they socialize, and these were 600 people over 60 years and older at high risk for moving into dementia. And the intervention group showed mean improvement in executive functioning and processing speed. So they did, it had a significant impact on someone's ability to function. It was not so much on the memory, but their speed of processing improved. And their ability to sort of think things out and decision make, that's kind of what the executive functioning is improved. So other risk factors we know for brain health, traumatic brain injury. I know at the Institute there's a lot of work going on in traumatic brain injury, especially in our veterans, because we do know that there's solid evidence to link that to an increased risk of dementia. And it's the thought of, you understand that process a little better, it might be a side door or fast forward into better Alzheimer's research also. A history of depression, there's a moderate link to an increased risk of cognitive decline. I've already mentioned that. Poor sleep is linked to earlier onset or more of a risk of dementia. And I put this one in because, and we do know from the literature that caregiving to family members with dementia takes a tremendous role on the caregiver themselves. And I won't even talk about that topic because it's pretty intense. So, take-home points from this: stop smoking if you're smoking. Physical activity, even mild activity, is linked to a decreased risk of cognitive impairment. The goal for that is to get to aim for 150 minutes minimum of moderate intensity exercise on a weekly basis. So that's, and that can be done in small segments. So if you've never, I always tell people, don't go out and run the Ringling Bridge Run if you've never done it, because you're going to be in the hospital for other reasons. But I think gently kind of increasing, doing some walking is really important. And your exercise should be such that you kind of huff and puff a little bit, but can still carry on a conversation with someone. That's kind of the best definition that I've heard of moderate intensity exercise. And of course, a diet. A Mediterranean diet has the most evidence among diets for reducing cognitive decline and dementia. So, the rainbow-colored, with the low-processed, rainbow-colored food tray is really, to the goal to achieve as many colorful different fruits and vegetables, and eliminating the red meats and that type of thing. Additional take-home points from this: coffee. I was so delighted to hear that coffee's kind of okay. And some studies have indicated whether it's caffeinated or decaffeinated, but having a couple cups of coffee might not be as bad as we thought. So that's good news for some of us. Hearing aids if needed, of course, that's really important. And we know that people lose hearing. I don't know what the percentages are, but many of us will, lose hearing for whatever reason. Socialization, really, really important. Learning something new we've talked about. Meditation is also, and I would add spirituality in there because I think the two are linked together pretty closely. And I wanted to share with you when I talk about meditation, because I get stuff all the time in the mail and the email about some of the latest research on this. And just 2 days ago, after I had sort of prepared for this, in my inbox, there's a new study that links between high levels of stress and memory loss in younger people. So this study has actually found, and this is a pretty credible study, that higher levels of cortisol, which is a stress hormone, seem to predict brain function, brain size, and performance on cognitive tests. And in this study, they actually studied people at a younger age, because when we talk about dementia, we focus on a sort of more of a senior population. But they found memory loss and brain shrinkage in relatively young people. They looked at them at an average age of 48, I think over about 8 years, and found that people with chronically high levels of stress actually showed poorer performance on tests. Their cortisol levels were higher, and they were able to do some sophisticated brain scans to find that the brain's actually shrinking in parts. So stress, folks, really, has a bigger role than we've thought about it, and even stress in earlier life. So, if you can think about that and modifying it, I link that in sort of with the idea of meditation and kind of cooling things down. I think it's really important. Staying positive, getting help for depression, good sleep hygiene, and being really careful with the over-the-counter medications. Just because they're in the drugstore doesn't mean that they're all healthy. And we know a lot of them with diphenhydramine and some of the other things over time will lead to reduced brain function. So you've got to be careful in using those, and they often don't always work well with your prescription medications either. So my take-home point with this is always, because, we get bombarded with stuff all of the time, and it's like, what should I believe when you're seeing, 3 or 4 different kind of news articles coming out at a time? And how do you judge the credibility of them? And I think you have to look at who were the scientists, where was it published, what was the size of the study? I think somebody contacted me recently, well, what'd you think about this small study that was done in Australia on, a group of 12 or whatever? And it's like, it sounds like it might be promising, but you can't generalize that to everyone to make sure it's credible. You have to be careful with anything that has advertisement on it also. There's a lot of exploitation out there. And you can forget the jellyfish ads. I'm sorry, but I hate that commercial. And save your money because, get a new pair of sneakers and take a good walk or something, because to me it's exploitive in terms of what it claims to be doing. So, the summary with this is that research regarding neurocognitive diseases is promising, has a long way to go, but you can reduce your risk now. It's never too late to start to reduce your risk. So on that, I'm going to end, and I'm sure some of you may have some questions, and I'm happy to entertain those privately.